Texas, when they met and began dating in the fall of 1987. It is said that the two of them fell in love like almost immediately. Their chemistry was so right and so bright that they basically were described as being completely unable to stay away from each other, and they spent hardly any time apart once they got together. And I just think that's absolutely adorable. So, I do have a little bit of background about Sally. Sally had a bit of a troubled childhood. I'm not really going to get into the details, but these things led to her own insecurities and some pretty low self-esteem. Sally loved people, but she wasn't always sure that people loved her right back. And she was looking for this sense of acceptance that we all kind of look for in our lives. And this led her to choose a group of friends that weren't necessarily actually her friends. Sally's new friends were involved in a satanic cult, and they got Sally involved in activities that she wouldn't normally have partaken in, causing her to become rebellious as she spent more and more time with them. Sally's mother, Pat Wade, became concerned when Sally started sneaking out at night. And one night she confronted her, but Sally absolutely refused to tell her mother where she had been. And Pat starts investigating, as parents do, and she called one of Sally's friend's parents. And she finds out that Sally may be involved in this cult. And she was right. She tried to tell Sally that she could no longer hang out with these people, but teenagers, right? So Sally begins to attend these ritualistic parties pretty regularly. And because she loved Shane so much and she couldn't stand to be away from him, she also introduced him to this group of people. She wanted him to be part of this group, and Shane was described as this pretty easygoing, just kind of friendly guy, and his father, Marshall, noticed that once Shane and Sally really started hanging out with this group of kids, now he's 16, he started to get more aggressive. He started getting into fights. In fact, there was like a pretty serious one where he was thrown into this river and he had some injuries. So Marshall did tell his son Shane to be careful as to what he was getting involved in. So Sally is so excited about this group of people and these rituals and stuff. She goes to her best friend Helen and she's like, "You have got to come to this party with me." So Helen's like, "Yeah, okay." And she goes to this party with Sally and she witnesses Sally get into this sort of trance-like state during one of these rituals, and Helen immediately knows that she is not interested in this and she is not going to go to any future gatherings with this group of people. In January of 1988, Shane and Sally move into their own apartment together. As I said, they just couldn't stand being apart. So, I mean, they're still pretty young to get an apartment, but I'm not judging. It wasn't long before Sally and Shane realized they had gotten involved with the wrong group of people, and they decided that they needed to get out of the grasps of this satanic cult. And after 3 months of living together, in March of 1988, Sally goes to the police. She speaks with Sheriff's Deputy Larry Counts because a member of this cult had given her a gun, and she was told that this weapon was used in not just a robbery, but also a murder. And Sally was smart, and she knew she didn't want anything to do with this gun, and that taking it to the police department was the right thing to do. Sally tells Deputy Counts that this satanic cult was involved in activities that could get them in trouble, and they were scared, and they didn't want to be a part of it anymore. She told this deputy how this cult was involved in drugs, and that they were having, like, group sex parties, and she went on to say that she was extremely afraid that she and Shane knew too much to escape this group just scot-free, that they would be unable to just leave. The two of them firmly believed that their lives would be in danger. Now, Deputy Counts is like, okay, these teenage kids, like, whatever, it's far-fetched and I don't believe it. But he searches the serial number on this gun, and it does come back as stolen. So he starts to think maybe Sally isn't trying to string him along, you know? 6 weeks after speaking with the deputy, Sally and Shane make the decision to leave town separately for their own safety, and they part ways. It was extremely hard for this young couple to stay apart. I mean, we were not in the age of cell phones. They couldn't video chat, you know, and after about 6 weeks or so, they eventually decided to come back to town to see each other on Independence Day. I don't really know what the plan was for after this, but 2 weeks before Sally was scheduled to arrive back in San Angelo, she called Helen and she told Helen, now Helen's her best friend, so she's like, hey, I think someone's trying to kill me. Now Helen really didn't take Sally seriously, and she thought maybe she was just exaggerating, and it didn't even occur to Helen that maybe she should, like, call the police or call Sally's mom or anything, which I think is kind of crazy. Like, you know that your friend left town to get away from these people. You don't think maybe you should say something? Around noon on July 3rd, Shane gets a phone call. He's already back in town, and Marshall overhears it. And Marshall believes that this phone call was about money and something to do with the cult. However, Shane just brushed it off and told him that everything was fine. So, Sally and Shane finally get together again for the local Independence Day celebration in San Angelo. On July 4th, they go to Lake Nasworthy to watch fireworks at 9 p.m. before later moving on to a fishing reservoir to sit and talk, or, you know, make out. Now, before Shane left the house, he gave his dad a hug, and Marshall reminded him to be home by 11. So Shane drives Sally in his prize Chevy Camaro to the lake after the fireworks to spend just a little bit more time together. A local fisherman by the name of Randall Littlefield was on the water, and he noticed the two parked near the lake. He said that the sounds of their conversation carried, and they seemed to be arguing just a little. They were concerned for their safety, and Sally said she just wanted to be done with it. But Mr. Littlefield decided this wasn't any of his business, and he carried on with his evening. The next morning, a ranger working near the fishing reservoir noticed Shane's abandoned Camaro and thought it was kind of odd for the car to have been left there. So he looks inside, and he notices the fast food wrappers on the front seat of the car, which isn't that strange, but then he also notices that the keys have been left on the dashboard. as if he'd been into a fight, but this kid refused to speak to Marshall about the case. Nonetheless, even though they weren't that worried, the sheriff's department agreed to list both Sally and Shane as missing persons just to be safe, which I thought was ridiculous. In November of 1988, a couple of hunters were walking through a pasture 17 miles from the spot where Shane's car was found when they stumbled across the remains of a victim. The hunters called the sheriff's department to come out and investigate the scene. Shane's father, Marshall, had been listening to his own police scanner when he heard the news of a body being recovered, and he knew in his gut that these remains had something to do with Shane and Sally's disappearance. And he rushed out to this scene, and believe it or not, deputies allowed Marshall to take a look at these skeletal remains, and he immediately knew that he was looking at his son. The remains were still wearing the same clothing that Shane had left the house in on the 4th of July. And Marshall knelt down next to his son and he said, "I have found you, and I have come to take you home." Just a few days later, the remains of Sally were also found in close proximity to Shane. While the elements of nature had washed away most of the evidence in the area, the police were able to determine that both Sally and Shane had died from multiple gunshot wounds. Unfortunately, the sheriff's department did not have much evidence to go on, and this case went cold. In 1994, a DNA profile was recovered from the evidence found next to Shane's car. It was uploaded into the national database, but they have not found a match as of yet. In July of 2014, the sheriff's department announced that this case had been reopened, and they had two major developments. A person of interest was located in a foreign country, and Shane's remains had been exhumed for DNA purposes. Investigators also planned on getting DNA samples from the person of interest in this case. However, I couldn't find out if any matches were made to the crime scene evidence. In February of 2016, the Texas Department of Public Safety announced that they were asking for the public's help in solving this case, and it was announced that a reward was being offered. In 2017, a man named John Cyrus Gilbreth was stopped by police for a traffic violation, and this quickly escalated into a more serious situation when the police searched his car. John was found to be in possession of large quantities of marijuana. He was a felon, and so he had a firearm with him, so also unlawful possession of a firearm and unlawful possession of body armor by a felon. John was quickly arrested and taken to jail. The passenger in the car with him informed police that John was trafficking drugs, and in exchange for being let go, he also told the police that John kept valuable information of his activities at home. So the police found this information quite useful and obtained a warrant to search John's house. And they were expecting to find, ledgers of his drug trafficking activity, but they were quite shocked with some other discoveries that they made. Police found items that they believe may have potentially linked John to the murders of Sally and Shane. He kept diaries from his younger years, and although this information has not been released, within the pages of these diaries were information about Sally and Shane. The police also found 3 audio tapes marked with Shane's initials. However, I can't tell you what was on those tapes because this information has not been released to the public. And most disturbing to me, and of all, were these biological substances that the police located within John's house, which included fingernails, all along. He was one of the members of the satanic cult that Shane and Sally were a part of. He was 17 years old at the time, and he had previous convictions of felony theft and delivery of marijuana. After he was released on bail, he was convicted of those charges, and he is currently serving time in prison. But he has not, as of yet, been charged with the murders of Sally and Shane. But he is still considered a person of interest. The sheriff's department is further investigating him, and they are reevaluating the small amount of evidence they have in these murders. Both Pat Wade and Marshall Stewart have not given up hope that whoever killed their children that night will be caught and will face the consequences of their actions. They are still seeking justice for Sally and Shane. If you or anyone you know has any information on who murdered Sally McNelly and Shane Stewart, please contact the Tom Green County Sheriff's Office at 325-655-8111. Now, this information will be in the description box at the bottom of this video. But I think this case is crazy, guys. I think it sucks so much. Like, these two kids just wanted a group of friends. They just wanted people to hang out with. And they were young, and they had their whole lives ahead of them, and they just got involved in something they shouldn't have been involved with. And literally lost their lives because of it, and it makes me absolutely devastated. I do think that John killed them. I find it quite strange that they had these diaries with all this information. I don't know how much information it was, don't let me fool you, but had this information, but they still haven't convicted this guy. Like, they found all of this stuff in 2017. We are now in 2022. What is the holdup? I don't understand. Clearly, they have listened to these tapes. They've seen this diary. So, what is the holdup, Texas? Come on. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this case. I don't think you guys liked my Elvis video last week. Some of you did, don't get me wrong. But, yep, it appears that true crime is the way. But sometimes I need a break, and I will continue to do that for my own mental health. So hopefully that's okay with you guys. I really worry sometimes about switching to other content because I honestly believe people will unsubscribe, and that makes me so sad. But anyway, thanks guys. I will see you on Wednesday on Patreon for hopefully part 3 and the end of the Jack the Ripper book. And then I will see you next week on the channel for another true crime video. Please drop your case suggestions in the description box. In the comments down below, because my list is running a little short. All the cases that I've been trying to research lately really don't have a lot of information, and I like to make much longer videos for you guys. There's just not enough details on some of these cases. Thanks guys. I hope you have a great Sunday.